The ivory silk of Sophia's dress cascaded behind her like spilled moonlight as she walked down the endless aisle. Each step echoed through the cathedral's vaulted ceiling. Sunlight filtered through stained glass windows, casting rainbow fragments across the marble floor. Fragments that seemed to dance and shimmer with each heartbeat that thundered in her chest. The organ's melody swelled around her, but all she could hear was the rushing of blood in her ears as she gazed ahead at Adrian. He stood at the altar like something carved from a Renaissance dream, his dark hair catching the light, his emerald eyes fixed on hers with an intensity that made her knees weak. The charcoal gray of his tuxedo contrasted perfectly with the white roses and baby's breath that adorned every pew, every pillar, every surface of this perfect moment she had dreamed of since she was a little girl. "You look breathtaking, Sophia," her father whispered beside her, his voice thick with emotion as he squeezed her arm. She could feel the tears threatening to spill over her carefully applied mascara, but she held them back. This was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. The culmination of 3 years with the man who had swept her off her feet at that charity gala, who had proposed under the stars on the beach where they had their first kiss, who had promised her forever with such conviction that she never doubted he meant every word. The guests rose as they passed, faces beaming with joy, handkerchiefs already dabbing at eyes, cameras flashing like captured lightning. She caught a glimpse of her mother in the front row, her hands clasped to her heart, pride radiating from every line of her face. Behind her sat Adrian's mother, Diane, her lips curved in what should have been a smile, but somehow felt cold against her sharp features. Something flickered in her dark eyes as their gazes met, something Sophia couldn't quite name, but that sent an unexpected shiver down her spine despite the warmth of the cathedral. "Don't be ridiculous," she chided herself. "It's just nerves. Wedding day jitters. Everything is perfect." But as she continued toward Adrian, she noticed Lucille standing among the bridesmaids, her platinum blonde hair gleaming under the cathedral lights. Sophia's best friend since college, the woman who had helped her choose this very dress, who had planned her bachelorette party, who had been there through every moment of doubt and every surge of joy throughout this engagement. She should have been glowing with happiness for Sophia, but there was something in her expression, a tightness around her blue eyes, a strain in her smile that made Sophia's stomach flutter with unease. "Stop it," she commanded her racing thoughts. "This is your wedding day. Focus on Adrian. Focus on love. Focus on forever." Sophia's father placed her hand in Adrian's, and the familiar warmth of his touch steadied her. His fingers were strong, confident, but she could swear she felt the slightest tremor run through them as they closed around hers. When she looked up into his face, searching for reassurance, she found his eyes darting briefly toward the congregation before settling back on her. "Dearly beloved," the priest began, his voice carrying across the hushed cathedral. "We are gathered here today to witness the union of Adrian Michael Brown and Sophia Rose Mitchell in holy matrimony." The ceremony unfolded like a fairy tale. Adrian's vows were poetry, words about soulmates and destiny and love that would transcend time itself. Sophia's own voice trembled as she promised to love him in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, till death do us part. The weight of those words settled around them like a blessing, and when he slipped the platinum band onto her finger, she felt complete in a way she had never imagined possible. "You may kiss the bride." Adrian's lips found hers, soft and warm and perfect, and the cathedral erupted in applause and cheers. Rice and rose petals showered down on them as they practically floated back down the aisle, her hands secure in his, her heart soaring with the absolute certainty that she was the luckiest woman alive. The reception was a whirlwind of dancing and laughter, champagne toasts, and tear-filled speeches. Adrian spun her around the dance floor to their song, "At Last" by Etta James, while their friends and family looked on with joy-brightened faces. Every detail was perfect, from the cascading white orchids that adorned each table to the 7-tier cake that looked like it belonged in a museum. But as the evening wore on, Sophia began to notice small things that pricked at her euphoria like tiny thorns. Adrian's smile seemed forced during the father-daughter dance she shared with her dad, and he kept checking his watch when he thought no one was looking. When she caught Lucille's eye during the bouquet toss, which Lucille made no effort to catch despite being single, Lucille looked away quickly, her cheeks flushing pink in a way that had nothing to do with the champagne. Most unsettling of all was Diane, Adrian's mother, who spent most of the reception whispering urgently with relative Sophia didn't recognize, her dark eyes occasionally flicking toward Adrian and Sophia with what looked almost like pity. The thought was so absurd that she dismissed it immediately, but it left a cold spot in her chest that even Adrian's kisses couldn't quite warm. "Ready to get out of here, Mrs. Brown?" Adrian murmured against her ear as the reception wound down, his breath sending delicious shivers along her neck. The sound of her new name on his lips should have thrilled her, but there was something in his tone, a hurried quality that made her pull back to study his face. "Is everything all right?" she asked, noting the tension in his jaw, the way his eyes kept darting toward the exit. "Of course," he said, but his laugh sounded hollow. "Just eager to start our honeymoon, that's all." They said their goodbyes in a flurry of hugs and well wishes, rice and sparklers lighting their way to the waiting limousine. Adrian's ancestral home, now their home, waited for them in the hills outside the city, a sprawling Victorian mansion that had been in his family for generations. It was where they would spend their wedding night before flying to Paris the next morning, where they would begin the rest of their lives as husband and wife. The house loomed against the star-scattered sky as they pulled up the winding drive, its Gothic windows gleaming like watchful eyes in the moonlight. Ivy crawled up the stone walls, and ancient oak trees cast twisted shadows across the manicured grounds. It was beautiful in a haunting, old-world way, but tonight it felt more imposing than romantic. Adrian was quiet during the drive, his hand resting on her knee, but his attention fixed on something beyond the window. When she tried to engage him in conversation about the ceremony, about how perfect everything had been, his responses were distracted, automatic. "The guest room in the East Wing has been prepared for your mother," he said suddenly, breaking a long stretch of silence. She blinked in confusion. "My mother went home with my father. Remember? They're not staying here tonight." Adrian's face went blank for a moment. Then he shook his head with a forced laugh. "Right, of course. Sorry, I'm just tired. It's been a long day." But his explanation didn't ease the growing knot of uneasiness in Sophia's stomach. This wasn't like Adrian at all. He was usually so attentive, so focused on her, especially during important moments. Tonight, on what should have been the most important night of their lives together, he seemed like a stranger wearing her husband's face. The limousine pulled to a stop in front of the grand entrance, and the driver came around to open their door. Adrian helped her out, his hand steady but impersonal, more polite than passionate. The train of her dress whispered against the stone steps as they climbed toward the massive oak doors, their brass knockers gleaming in the porch light. Inside, the house was dimly lit, shadows pooling in corners and dancing along the walls lined with portraits of Adrian's ancestors. Their painted eyes seemed to follow their progress as Adrian led Sophia toward the main staircase, his footsteps echoing in the marble-floored foyer. "I had Rosa prepare the master suite," he said, his voice carrying a strange formality. "Everything should be ready for tonight." The way he said those last words sent a chill through Sophia that had nothing to do with the house's drafty corridors. This wasn't how she had imagined their wedding night beginning. Where was the romance, the passion, the overwhelming joy of two people finally united as one? They climbed the stairs in silence, her dress trailing behind her like a ghostly echo of the day's celebration. The master suite was at the end of a long hallway lined with more ancestral portraits. And as Adrian pushed open the heavy door, she gasped at the beauty that greeted her. Rose petals covered the king-sized bed in intricate patterns. Candles flickered on every surface, casting dancing light across silk curtains and antique furniture. A bottle of champagne chilled in an ice bucket beside two crystal flutes, and the scent of jasmine and vanilla filled the air from dozens of white roses arranged throughout the room. "It's beautiful," she breathed, some of her earlier tension melting away. This was more like the Adrian she knew, romantic, thoughtful, attentive to every detail. But when she turned to share this moment with him, to lose herself in his arms and finally claim the passion that had been building between them all day, she found him checking his phone, his brow furrowed in concentration. Before we continue, I ask you to please write in the comment which country you are watching this video from. I love knowing where our global family is tuning in from. And if this is your first time on this channel, please subscribe. Your support helps us bring even more epic revenge tales to life. Enjoy listening. Adrian, she called softly. He looked up quickly, sliding the phone into his pocket. Sorry, just work. You know how it is. On our wedding night. The words came out sharper than she intended, and she saw him flinch slightly. It's nothing urgent, he said, but he was already moving toward the door. I just need to make a quick call. Some issue with the Paris hotel reservations. I'll be right back, I promise. Before she could protest, before she could ask why this couldn't wait until morning, he was gone, leaving her alone in the candlelit room with nothing but the echo of his footsteps disappearing down the hall. She stood there for a long moment, the silence pressing against her like a physical weight. The rose petals that had seemed so romantic moments before now felt like scattered fragments of a dream that was already starting to crumble. The candles flickered, casting shifting shadows that made the room feel alive with watching eyes. He'll be back, she told herself firmly. It's just nerves, cold feet, perfectly normal. But as minutes ticked by and turned into an hour, her rationalizations began to feel as fragile as tissue paper in the rain. She tried calling his phone, but it went straight to voicemail. She tried texting, but received no response. The champagne sat untouched, its bubbles slowly dying in the crystal flutes. She changed out of her wedding dress and into the silk nightgown she had chosen specially for tonight. Ivory lace with tiny pearl buttons that caught the candle light like captured stars. She brushed her hair until it fell in waves over her shoulders, applied the perfume Adrian loved, and waited and waited. The house settled around her with creaks and sighs that sounded almost like whispers in the darkness beyond the windows. Somewhere in the distance, a clock chimed 11, then 11:30. The candles burned lower, wax pooling on the antique surfaces, and still Adrian didn't return. By the time the grandfather clock in the hall struck midnight with deep, resonant chimes, she was pacing the room like a caged animal, her silk slippers silent on the Persian rug. Anger had replaced hurt, and fear was beginning to creep in around the edges of both emotions. Where could he be? What could possibly be so important that he would abandon his bride on their wedding night? And then, cutting through the silence that followed the clock's final chime, she heard it. A sound that made her blood freeze in her veins and her heart skip several beats before resuming at a frantic pace. It was coming from somewhere deeper in the house. A low, rhythmic creaking that seemed almost intimate, like bed springs. The thought was so horrific, so impossible that she rejected it immediately. You're being paranoid. It's an old house. Old houses make noises. But as she pressed her ear to the door, the sound continued, accompanied now by what might have been muffled voices or gasps, or her hand shook as she turned the ornate brass doorknob, easing the door open just enough to slip into the hallway. The corridor stretched before her like a tunnel, lit only by sconces that cast pools of yellow light between long stretches of shadow. The sounds were clearer now, coming from the direction of the east wing where the guest rooms were located. Each step felt like walking through quicksand, her bare feet soundless on the runner that lined the hardwood floor. Portraits of Adrian's ancestors watched her progress with painted eyes that seemed to gleam with secrets, and more than once she thought she saw movement in her peripheral vision, only to turn and find nothing but shadows and stillness. The sounds grew louder as she approached the east wing, and with them came the unmistakable sound of voices, hushed but urgent, intimate in a way that made her stomach turn. It can't be. It's impossible. Adrian loves me. We just got married. Just hours ago, he promised to love me forever. But even as her mind raced with denial, her body knew the truth. Every instinct screamed danger, betrayal, heartbreak so profound it would shatter everything she thought she knew about love, about trust, about the man she had just promised to spend her life with. She paused outside the door where the sounds were strongest. Diane's suite, the one she had occupied whenever she visited from her home in Europe. Light seeped from beneath the door, warm and golden, and the voices inside were clearer now, though still muffled by the heavy wood. A woman's laugh, soft and breathless. A man's voice, deep and familiar, whispering something that made the woman sigh. The sound of movement, urgent and passionate. Sophia's hand hovered over the doorknob for what felt like an eternity. Every rational thought warring with the growing certainty that opening this door would destroy everything. Her marriage, her trust, her heart. her very sense of reality. But she had to know. Even if the knowing killed her, she had to know. The brass was cold beneath her palm as she turned it slowly, praying it wouldn't creak. Praying she was wrong. Praying that whatever she found beyond this threshold wouldn't be the end of everything beautiful she had ever believed in. The door opened silently on well-oiled hinges, revealing a scene that would be burned into her memory until the day she died. Candles flickered throughout Diane's suite, casting dancing light across antique furniture and Persian carpets. But it was the bed that commanded her attention, the massive four-poster bed where two figures moved together in passionate embrace, their bodies intertwined, their voices raised in sounds of pleasure that felt like daggers in her chest. At first, all she could see were shadows and curves, limbs pale in the candlelight. The woman's hair was spread across the pillows like spilled gold, and the man's broad shoulders blocked most of her view as he moved above her. But then he shifted, and the profile that was revealed in the flickering light made the world tilt on its axis. Her husband, the man who had promised to love only her just hours before, was making love to another woman in his mother's bed, his wedding ring catching the candlelight as his hands roamed her body with familiar intimacy. The woman beneath him arched upward, her face turning toward the door, and when Sophia saw who it was, the last fragments of her world crumbled to dust. Lucille, her best friend, her maid of honor, the woman who had helped her choose her wedding dress, who had held her hand through every pre-wedding anxiety, who had told her just this morning how lucky she was to have found such a wonderful man. They moved together with the rhythm of lovers who had done this many times before. Their whispered endearments and passionate sighs, a symphony of betrayal that echoed in Sophia's shattered soul. "I've missed this," Lucille breathed, her fingers trailing down Adrian's back. "I hated watching you marry her today." "It had to be done," Adrian replied, his voice thick with desire. "But it's over now. She'll never suspect. We can finally be together the way we've always planned." The words hit Sophia like physical blows, each one stealing another piece of her breath until she was dizzy with lack of oxygen. Always planned. How long had this been going on? How long had she been living a lie? What if she finds out? Lucille's voice carried a note of concern that might have been touching if it weren't about deceiving Sophia. "She won't," Adrian said with confident cruelty. "Sophia's too trusting, too naive. She sees what she wants to see. Besides, after tonight, we'll have access to her trust fund. We can disappear anywhere in the world." Trust fund. The inheritance from her grandmother that Sophia had signed over to Adrian's control just last week as part of their pre-marriage financial planning. The inheritance she had trusted him to manage because she loved him, because she believed he would always have her best interests at heart. The betrayal was so complete, so calculated that for a moment she couldn't process it. This wasn't a moment of weakness, a single mistake born of cold feet or confusion. This was a deliberate, planned deception that had been orchestrated before she even knew Adrian existed. She must have made a sound, a gasp or a sob or some involuntary expression of devastation, because both figures on the bed froze. Adrian's head turned toward the door, and in the candlelight, Sophia saw his face transform from passion to shock to something that might have been guilt if he were capable of such an emotion. Sophia. Her name fell from his lips like a curse. Lucille scrambled to pull the sheets around herself, her face flushed with more than passion now. Embarrassment, fear, and something that looked almost like relief. "I can explain," Adrian began. But his voice sounded hollow, automatic, like a recording of words he'd never expected to need. "Explain." The word came out as barely a whisper, but it seemed to echo in the sudden silence that filled the room. "Explain how?" "Explain what?" She stepped into the room fully, her silk nightgown rustling in the thick air that smelled of sex and betrayal and the death of innocence. Both of them watched her with the wary attention of predators caught over a kill. "Explain how my husband is in bed with my best friend on our wedding night." Her voice was getting stronger now, fueled by an anger so pure it felt almost holy. "Explain how this was all planned. How you're both stealing my money. How my entire marriage is a lie." "It's not what it looks like," Lucille said, her voice small and pathetic. Sophia laughed, and the sound was so bitter it made her flinch. "Not what it looks like. You're naked in bed with my husband talking about your plans to steal from me. And it's not what it looks like." Adrian swung his legs over the side of the bed, reaching for his clothes. Sophia, please let me explain. It's complicated. Complicated. She was shouting now, all pretense of control abandoned. What's complicated about betrayal? What's complicated about lies? What's complicated about ruining someone's life for money? You don't understand. I understand perfectly. The words exploded from her with years of suppressed emotion behind them. You never loved me. This whole thing, our entire relationship was about my inheritance. Was any of it real? Any of it at all? The silence that followed was answer enough. Adrian's face had gone pale, but there was no remorse there. No regret for the pain he had caused. Only calculation, the wheels turning as he tried to figure out how to minimize the damage to his carefully laid plans. Sophia, if you'll just calm down and listen, calm down. She felt something snap inside her. Some final thread that had been holding her sanity together. You want me to calm down? I trusted you with everything. My heart, my body, my future, my money. I gave you everything I had, and this is how you repay me. Lucille had been silent through this exchange, clutching the sheet to her chest. But now she spoke up with the kind of misplaced indignation that only the truly selfish can muster. It wasn't supposed to happen like this, she said. You weren't supposed to find out. Oh well, that makes it so much better. Sophia turned her fury on her. This woman who had smiled at her wedding just hours before, who had hugged her and told her how happy she was for her. How long? How long has this been going on? Lucille looked at Adrian, seeking guidance or permission, or maybe just hoping he would answer for her. But Adrian was busy pulling on his shirt, his movements quick and efficient, like he was preparing for battle or escape. How long? Sophia demanded again. 2 years, Lucille whispered. 2 years. Before Adrian had even proposed, before he had told Sophia he loved her, before she had started planning the future she thought they would share. Since before we were engaged. Sophia's voice was very quiet now, very deadly. Adrian's hands stilled on his buttons. Sophia, since before you told me you loved me, since before you proposed, since before I introduced you to Lucille at that dinner party? The last piece fell into place with sickening clarity. She hadn't introduced them at all. They had already known each other. The surprise on Lucille's face when she brought Adrian home had been fake. Their chemistry, which she had chalked up to both of them being important to her, had been real, but for all the wrong reasons. You planned this from the beginning. It wasn't a question. You researched me, found out about my inheritance, and then what? Made sure you met me at that charity gala. Made sure I would fall in love with you. Adrian's silence was confession enough. And you, she turned back to Lucille, helped him. You were my friend first. You introduced him to all my vulnerabilities, told him exactly how to make me fall in love with him. Tears were streaming down Lucille's face now, but they looked more like frustration than genuine remorse. You have to understand, Sophia, Adrian, and I have history. We were together first. That's not an excuse. Sophia screamed. That's not a reason to destroy someone's life. If you wanted to be together, you should have stayed together. You shouldn't have involved me. We needed the money, Adrian said flatly, finally abandoning any pretense of love or regret. Lucille's family cut her off, and my business is failing. Your grandmother's trust fund was the solution to both our problems. The casual cruelty of it, the way he spoke about her life and her love as nothing more than a financial transaction, was almost more devastating than the betrayal itself. Get out. Sophia's voice was very quiet, very calm. Sophia, get out of this house, both of you. Now. This is my house, Adrian said. And there was something dangerous in his tone now, something that made Sophia take a step back. Actually, a voice said from the doorway, "It's mine." They all turned to see Diane standing in the entrance to her suite. Her dark hair perfectly coiffed despite the late hour, her expression colder than winter frost. She was fully dressed in an elegant black ensemble that made her look like she was attending a funeral, which Sophia supposed she was. "Mother," Adrian began. But Diane held up one perfectly manicured hand. "I've heard enough," she said, her accent making each word sound like a blade cutting through silk. "More than enough." "You knew," Sophia whispered, looking at this woman who had welcomed her into her family just hours before, who had smiled and made toasts and acted like she was gaining a beloved daughter-in-law. Diane's dark eyes met hers, and in them Sophia saw something she hadn't expected. Regret. "I suspected," she said quietly, "but I hoped I was wrong." I hope my son had more honor than this. Mother, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. Diane's voice could have frozen fire. You married this beautiful, trusting girl for her money while carrying on an affair with her friend. You planned to steal from her and abandon her. You have disgraced our family name and broken every vow you made before God. Adrian's face went through several expressions: surprise, anger, calculation, before settling on defensive indignation. She would never have missed the money. She's got more than she knows what to do with. That's not the point. Diane's composure cracked for just a moment, revealing the fury beneath. The point is that you are a thief and a liar and a disgrace to everything this family has stood for. She turned to Sophia, her expression softening slightly. I'm sorry, child. Sorrier than you can know. This house belongs to me, and I want you to know that you are welcome here. She looked at Adrian and Lucille with undisguised contempt. Are not. What do you mean it belongs to you? Adrian demanded. Diane smiled, and it was like watching a wolf bare its teeth. Did you really think I would leave our ancestral home to a son who would sell it for gambling money? The house, the land, all of it remains in my name. You have no claim here. The implications of this hit Adrian like a physical blow. Not only had his plan to steal Sophia's money failed, but he was also losing the home he had counted on inheriting. You can't do this, he said. I already have. Diane pulled a folded document from her purse. I've changed my will. You get nothing. Not the house, not the investments, not the family business. Nothing. But I'm your son. You were my son. Now you're just a stranger who happens to share my DNA. The finality in her voice, the complete severing of familial bonds, seemed to shock Adrian more than anything that had happened so far. He stared at his mother as if seeing her for the first time. Lucille, Diane continued, turning her attention to Sophia's former best friend. I suggest you collect your things and leave now, before I call the police and have you removed for trespassing. Lucille scrambled off the bed, clutching the sheet around herself, her face streaked with tears and mascara. Your clothes are in the guest room where you left them when you came here to seduce my son, Diane said with icy precision. You have 5 minutes. As Lucille hurried from the room, Diane turned back to Adrian. You have until sunrise to remove yourself and your belongings from this property. After that, you will be considered a trespasser. Where am I supposed to go? The plaintive note in his voice might have touched Sophia once. Now, it just sounded pathetic. That's not my concern, Diane replied. You should have thought of that before you decided to destroy your life for money. Adrian looked at Sophia then, and for a moment, she saw something that might have been genuine remorse in his eyes. Sophia, she held up a hand, surprised by how steady her voice was. Don't say you're sorry. Don't say it meant nothing. Don't say you love me. We both know that would be just another lie. He opened his mouth as if to argue, then closed it again. What could he say after all? What words could possibly bridge the chasm of betrayal that stretched between them? I trusted you, she said quietly. I gave you everything I had. My heart, my body, my future, my money. I would have done anything for you. And you threw it all away for what? A trust fund you could have shared if you'd just been honest. A woman who helped you deceive me. It wasn't supposed to happen like this, he said, echoing Lucille's earlier words. No, Sophia agreed. It was supposed to happen in secret, with me never finding out, with me living my whole life as your fool while you and Lucille laughed behind my back. The truth of that, the casual cruelty of their original plan, seemed to hit him for the first time. His face crumpled slightly, as if he was finally understanding the magnitude of what he had done. I never wanted to hurt you, he whispered. But you did. You have. And the worst part is that you would have kept hurting me forever if I hadn't found out. Diane had been watching this exchange with the attention of a hawk watching prey, and now she stepped forward. Sophia, dear, would you like me to call someone? Your parents? A friend? The thought of explaining this to her parents, of seeing the pity and horror in their eyes, made Sophia's stomach clench. And friends. Lucille had been her closest friend. The others were acquaintances at best. People who would be more interested in the scandal than in comforting her. No, she said quietly. Thank you. But no, I need to think. Diane nodded understandingly. You're welcome to stay here as long as you need. This house has seen its share of heartbreak over the years. Perhaps it can offer you some peace. Sophia looked around the room that had been the site of her world's destruction. At the rumpled bed, the flickering candles, the scattered clothes, and felt something cold and hard settle in her chest where her heart used to be. "I should go," Adrian said, but he made no move toward the door. "Yes," Sophia agreed. "You should." But still, he lingered as if hoping for forgiveness or understanding or some sign that this could be fixed. "Sophia, what we had was a lie." The words came out flat, final. All of it. Every kiss, every "I love you," every promise. It was all just part of your plan. "Not all of it," he protested. "Some of it was real. My feelings for you were convenient," Sophia finished. "Useful, but not real. If they were real, you wouldn't have been able to do this." He flinched as if she had struck him, but she felt no satisfaction in causing him pain. She felt nothing at all except a vast, echoing emptiness where her future used to be. "Go, Adrian. Take Lucille and go live your life with the woman you actually want, and let me figure out how to rebuild mine." This time he did move toward the door, but he paused at the threshold. "For what it's worth," he said without turning around, "I did care about you." "No," Sophia replied, her voice steady and sure. "You didn't. If you had, this never would have happened." The sound of his footsteps disappearing down the hallway was like a door closing on everything she had thought her life would be. Within minutes, she heard movement throughout the house, drawers opening and closing, muffled voices, the sounds of hasty packing. Diane remained with her through it all, her presence steady and comforting without being intrusive. When the front door finally slammed shut and a car engine started in the driveway, she moved to the window and watched until the tail lights disappeared into the night. "They're gone," she said quietly. Sophia nodded, not trusting her voice. "What will you do now?" It was a good question. What did someone do when their entire life imploded in the space of a single evening? When everything they had believed about love and trust and the future turned out to be carefully orchestrated lies? "I don't know," Sophia admitted. Diane moved to stand beside her, her hand gentle on Sophia's shoulder. "You'll survive," she said with quiet certainty. "You're stronger than you know." "I don't feel strong. I feel like a fool." "The two aren't mutually exclusive," Diane replied. "Sometimes being a fool is what allows us to love completely. The problem isn't with your capacity for trust. It's with their capacity for betrayal." They stood in silence for a while, surrounded by the evidence of Sophia's shattered dreams. Finally, Diane spoke again. "There's something else you should know," she said carefully. Sophia looked at her, not sure she could handle any more revelations. "The wedding guests, our family, your family, our friends. They're all staying at the hotel in town tonight. Tomorrow morning, they'll expect to see you off on your honeymoon. They'll want to congratulate you, to wish you well." The thought of facing all those people, of explaining what had happened or trying to pretend everything was fine, made Sophia's chest tight with panic. "I can't," she whispered. "I can't face them. I can't tell them." "Then don't," Diane said simply. Sophia stared at her. "What do you mean?" A slow smile spread across Diane's face, and it was sharp enough to cut glass. "I mean that Adrian and Lucille made their choices. They chose deception and betrayal and greed. Perhaps it's time they faced the consequences of those choices." "I don't understand." Diane turned to face her fully, her dark eyes glinting with something that might have been mischief or might have been vengeance. "My dear girl, you've been playing defense all evening. It's time to play offense." The morning sun streamed through the windows of the hotel's grand ballroom as the wedding guests gathered for what they thought would be a farewell breakfast before Adrian and Sophia departed for their honeymoon in Paris. Sophia stood at the back of the room, watching familiar faces chatting over coffee and pastries, completely unaware that their perfect wedding celebration was about to become something else entirely. She had barely slept, spending the remaining hours of her wedding night planning what Diane had called her moment of truth. Diane had been surprisingly helpful, providing details about Adrian's financial situation that Sophia hadn't known, contacts who could help her secure her assets, and most importantly, the courage to take control of her narrative rather than letting them write it for her. Sophia's parents sat at a table near the front, their faces glowing with pride and happiness that made her chest ache. Adrian's relatives filled several tables, their expressions expectant as they waited for the happy couple to make their appearance. Lucille's family was there, too, her parents beaming with the reflected joy of their daughter's best friend's perfect wedding. They had no idea what was coming. Adrian arrived first, looking polished and composed in his traveling clothes, his smile practiced and convincing. He worked the room like the consummate performer he was, accepting congratulations and well wishes with the kind of charm that had made Sophia fall in love with him in the first place. Watching him now, knowing what she knew, she could see the performance for what it was. Calculated, hollow, designed to extract maximum benefit from every interaction. Lucille appeared moments later, radiant in a powder blue dress that complemented her blonde hair perfectly. She moved through the crowd with the confidence of someone who believed she had gotten away with the perfect crime, hugging Sophia's relatives, laughing with old college friends, playing the role of the devoted best friend to perfection. Neither of them had seen Sophia yet, positioned as she was behind a decorative pillar near the entrance. She wanted to observe them first, to see how they would handle this charade before she brought their house of cards crashing down. "Ladies and gentlemen," Adrian called out, tapping his champagne flute with a silver spoon. The room gradually quieted, all attention focusing on Sophia's husband as he prepared to address their guests. "Thank you all for being here this morning. Sophia and I are so grateful for your presence at our wedding yesterday, and we wanted to share a few words before we head off to Paris." The crowd murmured appreciation, faces turned expectantly toward Adrian. He was in his element, commanding the room with practiced ease. "Yesterday was the most beautiful day of my life," he continued, his voice warm with what sounded like genuine emotion. "To marry the woman of my dreams, surrounded by everyone we love. There's no greater joy than that." Several people sighed appreciatively. Sophia's mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, still emotional from the previous day's events. "Sophia and I feel incredibly blessed," Adrian went on. "And we want you all to know how much your support means to us as we begin this new chapter of our lives together." It was a beautiful speech delivered with perfect sincerity. If she hadn't known better, Sophia might have been moved by it herself. Instead, she felt sick watching him manipulate these good people who genuinely cared about them. "Where is the blushing bride?" called out Sophia's Uncle Robert, looking around the room with a good-natured smile. Adrian's expression faltered for just a moment, so briefly that most people probably didn't notice, but Sophia saw it, that flicker of uncertainty as he realized he didn't actually know where she was or what she might be planning. "She's just freshening up," he said smoothly. "You know how women are always wanting to look perfect." The comment got a few chuckles, but Sophia noticed Lucille's face tighten slightly. She was scanning the room now, and when her eyes found Sophia behind the pillar, her face went pale. She said something to Adrian, too quietly for Sophia to hear, and she saw his body language change instantly. His shoulders tensed, his smile became strained, and his eyes began searching the crowd with barely concealed panic. It was time. Sophia stepped out from behind the pillar, moving through the crowd with measured steps. Conversations quieted as people noticed her approach, their faces lighting up with affection and curiosity about what she might say. She was wearing a simple black dress chosen deliberately for its funeral connotations, and her wedding ring was notably absent from her finger. She had left it on Diane's nightstand along with a note thanking her for her kindness and promising to stay in touch. "Sophia," her mother called out, rising from her chair with arms outstretched. "There's our beautiful bride." She kissed her mother's cheek, accepting her embrace while keeping her eyes fixed on Adrian. His face had gone ashen, and she could see the wheels turning as he tried to figure out what she might be planning to say. "Good morning, everyone," Sophia said, her voice carrying clearly through the ballroom. "Thank you all for coming this morning, and thank you for celebrating with us yesterday. It truly was illuminating." Adrian's eyes widened slightly at her word choice, but he maintained his composure. "I have something I'd like to share with all of you," Sophia continued, moving to stand beside Adrian at the front of the room. "Something important about my marriage." "Sophia," Adrian murmured under his breath. "What are you doing?" She ignored him, focusing instead on the sea of expectant faces before her. "Yesterday, I thought I was marrying the man of my dreams," she began, her voice steady despite the emotional storm raging inside her. "I thought I was beginning the greatest adventure of my life with someone who loved me as much as I loved him." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Several people smiled, clearly expecting a heartfelt declaration of love. But last night, I discovered something that changed everything. The energy in the room shifted, smiles faltering as people sensed the undercurrent of something darker in her tone. "Sophia, please," Adrian said, his voice urgent but quiet enough that only those closest could hear. "Don't do this. We can work this out." She turned to look at him fully, and in that moment, she let every ounce of pain and betrayal show on her face. "Can we, Adrian? Can we work out the fact that you spent our wedding night in bed with my best friend?" The silence that followed was so complete you could have heard a pin drop. Then the whispers started. Sharp intakes of breath, gasps of disbelief, the sound of chairs scraping as people turned to get a better view of the unfolding drama. Adrian's face cycled through several expressions: denial, anger, calculation, before settling on desperate damage control. "That's not. You don't understand what you saw." "I understand perfectly," Sophia said, her voice cutting through his protests like a blade. "I understand that this entire relationship was a lie designed to give you access to my inheritance. I understand that you and Lucille have been planning this betrayal for 2 years. I understand that my wedding was nothing more than a business transaction to you." The room erupted in shocked exclamations. Sophia's father was on his feet, his face dark with fury, while her mother sat frozen in her chair, one hand pressed to her chest, as if she were having trouble breathing. "Is this true?" demanded Adrian's uncle Ronan, a stern man who had given one of the toasts the night before. Adrian opened his mouth to respond, but Sophia wasn't finished. "Lucille," she called out, turning to face her former best friend. Lucille was pressed against the wall near the buffet table, her face the color of milk, her hands shaking as she gripped her purse like a lifeline. "Would you like to tell everyone how long you and Adrian have been sleeping together? Or shall I?" "Sophia, please," Lucille whispered, but her voice carried in the terrible silence. 2 years, Sophia announced to the room. "They've been having an affair for 2 years, planning this elaborate con to steal my grandmother's trust fund. The fund I stupidly signed over to Adrian's control just last week." The reaction was immediate and explosive. Sophia's father started toward Adrian with murder in his eyes, only to be restrained by her uncles. Lucille's mother began crying, her hands covering her face in shame. Adrian's relatives were shouting questions and accusations, their faces reflecting a mixture of shock, embarrassment, and rage. Through it all, Adrian stood frozen, his carefully constructed facade finally crumbling under the weight of public exposure. "You want to know the most pathetic part?" Sophia continued, her voice somehow remaining steady despite the chaos around her. "I would have given you anything you asked for. If you had just been honest, if you had told me you needed money, I would have helped you. But instead, you chose to destroy me for it." "Sophia," Adrian tried one more time, reaching for her arm. She stepped back, avoiding his touch like it was poison. Don't touch me. Don't speak to me. Don't ever come near me again." She turned to address the room one final time. "I want you all to know that I'm fine. I'm hurt, obviously, but I'm fine. And I want you to know that this betrayal says nothing about love or marriage or trust in general. It only says something about the character of the people who chose deception over honesty." She looked directly at Lucille, who was now sobbing openly. "I trusted you with my heart, and you sold it for money. I hope it was worth it." Finally, she turned back to Adrian, this man who had been her whole world just 24 hours before. "You can have each other," she said quietly. "You deserve each other." And with that, she walked out of the ballroom, leaving behind the wreckage of her old life and stepping into whatever came next. The months that followed were a blur of legal proceedings, asset recovery, and emotional reconstruction. Adrian had indeed transferred significant portions of Sophia's trust fund to accounts he controlled. But Diane's lawyers were ruthless in their pursuit of recovery. Within weeks, every penny had been returned, along with substantial penalties that left Adrian's already struggling business in ruins. Lucille's family, horrified by their daughter's behavior, cut her off completely. Adrian's relatives followed suit, ostracizing him from the family business and social circle that had provided his primary source of income and status. Sophia moved back to her apartment in the city, throwing herself into work and therapy with equal determination. The betrayal had shattered her ability to trust, but it had also revealed a strength she hadn't known she possessed. She had survived the worst thing she could imagine, and she was still standing. But karma, as it turned out, was just getting started. 6 months after that devastating morning in the hotel ballroom, Sophia received a call from an unknown number. "Sophia, it's Ronan, Adrian's uncle." She hadn't spoken to any of Adrian's family since the wedding debacle, so the call was unexpected. "Hello, Ronan. How are you?" "I'm well, thank you. I'm calling because, well, I thought you should know what's been happening with Adrian and Lucille." Despite herself, Sophia felt a flutter of curiosity. She had deliberately avoided any news about them, wanting to focus on her own healing rather than dwelling on their fate. "I'm not sure I want to know," she said honestly. "I think you do," Ronan replied. "They're destroying each other, Sophia. It's quite spectacular, actually." Against her better judgment, she found herself listening as Ronan filled her in on the chaos that had become Adrian and Lucille's relationship. Apparently, without Sophia's trust fund to cushion their fall, the stress of their dramatically reduced circumstances had begun eating away at their partnership like acid. Adrian blamed Lucille for encouraging him to go through with the marriage scheme, while Lucille blamed Adrian for getting caught. They had moved in together out of necessity rather than love, and the cramped apartment they could afford was a far cry from the luxury they had planned to enjoy. "Adrian's been drinking heavily," Ronan continued. "Lost what was left of his business, and now he can barely hold down a regular job. Lucille's working at a department store, and from what I hear, she hates every minute of it." "That's sad," Sophia said, and she was surprised to find that she meant it. Not because she felt sorry for them, but because the destruction of their lives felt more hollow than satisfying. "There's more," Ronan said. "They've been fighting constantly. Neighbors have called the police twice for domestic disturbances. Lucille tried to leave him last month, but she has nowhere to go. Her family won't take her back, and she burned all her other bridges when this came out." The picture Ronan painted was one of two people trapped in a prison of their own making, their betrayal having poisoned not only their victims, but themselves as well. "Why are you telling me this?" Sophia asked. Ronan was quiet for a moment. "Because I want you to know that justice has been served even if it didn't come from any court. They chose to build their happiness on the destruction of yours. And it turns out that's not a very stable foundation." After she hung up, Sophia sat in her apartment for a long time processing what she had learned. Part of her felt vindicated. They were getting exactly what they deserved. But a larger part felt empty, as if their suffering somehow diminished rather than validated her own healing. She realized then that true recovery meant letting go of the need for their punishment to define her peace. Their consequences were theirs to bear, just as her healing was hers to claim. A year later, Sophia met David. He was nothing like Adrian. Where Adrian had been smooth and charming, David was genuine and steady. Where Adrian had been focused on what she could give him, David was interested in who she was as a person. He knew her story from the beginning, knew about the betrayal and the trust issues it had created, and he was patient with her healing in a way that gradually rebuilt her faith in the possibility of honest love. Their relationship developed slowly, carefully, with a transparency that would have been impossible before her experience with Adrian. David's patience and consistency gradually convinced Sophia that not all men were predators, not all charm was manipulation, and not all love was conditional. 2 years after her disastrous first wedding, David proposed on the beach, where Adrian had once made promises he never intended to keep. But where Adrian's proposal had been a performance designed to manipulate her emotions, David's was simple, honest, and focused entirely on their genuine connection. She said yes. Their wedding was small, intimate, attended only by people who truly loved and supported them. Diane was there, having become an unexpected friend and mentor in the aftermath of Adrian's betrayal. Sophia's parents, who had struggled to trust their judgment after being so completely fooled by Adrian, slowly learned to love David for his genuine character. It was during the reception for this second wedding, as Sophia danced with her new husband, surrounded by people who actually cared about her happiness, that she saw a familiar figure standing at the edge of the garden. Adrian. He looked terrible, thin, unshaven, his clothes rumpled and stained. He stood behind the garden fence like a ghost from her past, his eyes fixed on her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Excuse me," she murmured to David, kissing his cheek. "I'll be right back." David followed her gaze and saw Adrian immediately. His jaw tightened, but he simply nodded. "Do you want me to come with you?" "No," Sophia said, surprising herself with how calm she felt. "I need to handle this myself." She walked across the garden toward Adrian, aware that several guests had noticed his presence and were watching nervously. When she reached the fence, She stopped just out of arm's reach and waited for him to speak. He looked even worse up close. His eyes were bloodshot. His skin had a grayish pallor, and he smelled like he hadn't bathed in days. "Sophia," he said, and his voice was hoarse, broken. "Adrian." She kept her tone neutral, professional. You look beautiful, happy." "Thank you." They stood in silence for a moment, the sounds of her wedding reception continuing behind her. Laughter, music, the clinking of glasses raised in genuine celebration. "I came to apologize," he said finally. "Did you? I know it doesn't matter now. I know it's too late, but I needed you to know that I'm sorry. For all of it." She studied his face, looking for the manipulation, the calculation that had always been there before. But all she saw now was broken desperation. "What happened to Lucille?" Sophia asked. Adrian's face crumpled. "She left me 6 months ago. Said she couldn't stand looking at me anymore. Couldn't stand what we'd become. And now you're alone." "Completely." He laughed, but it sounded more like a sob. "No money, no job, no family, no friends. Everyone I ever cared about won't speak to me." "Consequences," Sophia said simply. I know this is what I deserve. But Sophia, I need you to know what I felt for you was real. Maybe it started as part of the plan, but somewhere along the way, it became real." She looked at this broken man who had once been her whole world and felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, no vindication. Just a vast, peaceful emptiness where all that pain used to live. "It doesn't matter," she said quietly. "What? Whether it was real or not. It doesn't matter anymore." Adrian's face went through several expressions. Confusion, hope, despair. "I forgive you," Sophia continued, and she realized as she said the words that they were true. "Not for your sake, but for mine. I forgive you because carrying anger was poisoning my ability to be happy." "Does that mean?" "It means nothing except that I'm at peace with what happened. It means I hope you find a way to build a better life for yourself, but it doesn't mean I want you in mine." Adrian stared at her for a long moment, and she could see him processing the finality of her words. "You're really happy," he said, and there was wonder in his voice as if he was surprised that such a thing was possible after what he had done to her. "Yes, I am. With him. With myself," Sophia corrected. "David is wonderful, but my happiness doesn't depend on him the way it once depended on you. I learned to be whole on my own." This seemed to hit Adrian harder than anything else she had said. His face crumpled, and for a moment, she thought he might cry. "I destroyed everything," he whispered. "You destroyed what we had," Sophia agreed. "But you didn't destroy me. You couldn't." She took a step back from the fence, preparing to return to her real life, her real wedding, her real happiness. "Goodbye, Adrian." "Sophia, wait." She turned back, and in that moment, she saw him clearly for perhaps the first time. Not as the charming man who had swept her off her feet, not as the villain who had betrayed her, but as a deeply flawed human being who had made terrible choices and was living with the consequences. "I can't give you what you're looking for," she said gently. "I can't absolve you or take away your guilt or make your life better. You have to do that yourself. I don't know how. The same way I did. One day at a time, with help, with honesty, with the decision to be better than you were." She started to walk away again, then paused. "Adrian." "Yes." "Don't come to my wedding again. Don't come to my home. Don't contact me or David or anyone in my family. If you want to apologize, do it by living a life worth something. Do it by making sure you never hurt anyone the way you hurt me. And if I do that, if I become better." She looked at him one last time. This man who had taught her that she was stronger than she knew, more resilient than she had imagined, more capable of love than she had dared to hope. "Then maybe someday you'll forgive yourself," she said. "But that's between you and you. It has nothing to do with me." She walked back to her wedding reception, back to David, back to the life she had built from the ashes of her dreams. She didn't look back to see if Adrian was still standing at the fence, because it didn't matter. His story was his to write now, just as hers was hers. David met her halfway across the garden, his eyes searching her face for signs of distress. "Are you okay?" "I'm perfect," she said and meant it completely. He pulled her into his arms, and they danced under the stars while their friends and family celebrated around them. The past was past. The future stretched bright and unlimited before them. And in that moment, she was exactly where she belonged. Adrian never contacted Sophia again. Years later, Diane mentioned in passing that she had heard he was working as a counselor at a substance abuse clinic, helping other people rebuild their lives after hitting rock bottom. Whether that was true or not, whether he had found redemption or was still lost in the consequences of his choices, Sophia never knew. And she realized with deep satisfaction that she didn't need to know. Some stories end with revenge. Others end with justice. But the best ones, she learned, end with peace. Hers ended with love. Real love, honest love. The kind of love that builds rather than destroys, that heals rather than harms, that sees you clearly and chooses you anyway. It ended with her standing in her own strength, surrounded by people who valued her happiness more than her bank account, married to a man who saw her scars as proof of her resilience rather than evidence of her foolishness. It ended with the knowledge that betrayal had not broken her. It had revealed exactly how unbreakable she actually was.